mayor's State of the City speech just right before, and there was a lot of good news, and there are a lot of good things going on. There are a lot of attempts to address these issues, but I think what you were doing was giving the countervailing factual frame of reference to how far we have yet to go, setting an agenda for the future. But it's also sobering because when we start talking about the causes of these conditions, there were a lot of institutional responses from the government, the Office of Opportunity, Equal Opportunity. Then you hear locally, you had your Focus Hope, you had New Detroit, you had a number of organizations founded on the principles that were inspired by the Kerner Commission 50 years ago. And we could argue that it's sobering that we've had 50 years of some of these programs that have changed over the years. The funding and everything else has changed. But there was a very, how can I put this, a very focused top-to-bottom commitment to really address poverty, inequality, inclusion. People really did organize a method of changing this with objectives that would have been within 10 years, like by the 70s. I did a study in 1978 as a student assistant at the University of Michigan for the Bureau of Community Services that was operated by the Michigan Department of Labor. That was our state anti-poverty bureau. Back then, they had, under the Nixon administration, had gone from the Office of Economic Opportunity to the Community Services Administration. We have 31 community action programs in Michigan statewide. Here, National Services, NSO, NSD in the city, Counties United for Action, CUFA. We had a number of them here in the Southeast Michigan region, and these were nonprofits with public and private funding intended to address poverty and inequality. They still exist. They're still here.
Right.
And so, but in 1978, part of my research that I was asked to do as a student assistant was to look at the Kerner Commission 10 years later.
Right.
So the opening premise of my research was these same statistics and these same analytical foundations that we're describing now, and that was 40 years ago for me. So I've had 40 years myself wrestling with these same numbers that we're talking about today. 40 years for me. Yeah,
right. Again, you're listening to Redline here on 910 AM, the future of radio. I'm Bankole Thompson. We're discussing the 50th anniversary of the Kerner Commission report issued 5 decades ago to look at the racial riots, including Detroit's 1967. Attorney Tina Patterson, Tina, your take in terms of the report in itself in the Detroit context proper?
It's more than sobering. I would almost describe it as a crisis mode because if you look at Detroit in 2018, it's the largest poverty city in the nation. And I want to make a quick correction, too. I believe the census numbers came out last year that it went down from 40 to 35 points. But that was just for the year 2016. So if you look at the years 2012 to 2016, it's still at 40%. That's the 5-year estimate. So either way, I mean, it's still abnormally high for any other region in the nation. But if you look at Detroit, I mean, it is a modern-day Kerner Commission. It'll tell you the exact same things from 1968. We're still talking about it now.
Detroit is a modern-day Kerner Commission. Go ahead.
Modern-day Kerner Commission, yeah. And we talk about the bedrock of the American dream of home ownership. Detroit is a majority renting city. Yes, 51%. That's according to Detroit Future City. 51% are renters. 48% are owners, and even that went down just a few percentage points.
So Detroit confirms the basically the Kerner Commission report 50 years ago, 50 years later.
Yeah, and that's for, obviously Detroit is an 80% black city, and another thing I wanted to point out from the Kerner Commission, there was the previous study done, the Moynihan report, which was maybe 3 years
Patrick
before.
Moynihan from New York.
Yes, and that was kind of blaming the turmoil of black life on the lack of a nuclear family and on single mother headed home.
The morality argument.
Right. However, there was a study just maybe in the past couple of years that the new Kerner Commission numbers confirm it, that it doesn't matter if it's a single-parent household in the black community or a 2-parent married household with degrees, without degrees. Single white women have more wealth. So that just completely destroys the morality argument. Yeah. It's not about that. It traces it all back to the legacy of slavery and exactly racism, redlining, property. We go back to property. It all ties to the same premise, but we're saying the same thing decades and decades out. There hasn't been any true progress, no matter what kind of government, Democrat, Republican, whoever has been there, has not done.
No, you're right. And I think both parties have to be blamed. And I liked, your term, Detroit is a modern-day county commission. Do you agree? 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the number to call to chime in and join this conversation. Is Detroit a modern-day county commission? I think it's also instructive that you cited the Future City report that Detroit is a majority rental city.
Majority rental city, 51%, yes. And that's confirmed also by the census as well.
So the county commissioner, Brian, raises the issue of home ownership, which they point to as one of the culprits holding Black life hostage. Detroit is a compelling evidence. If the issue of inequality were in a court of law, Detroit would be the biggest evidence you will submit to convince a jury and a judge to hand down a verdict.
But it's a complicated body of evidence. It's not just...
I like that, complicated body of evidence.
You can't just sit back and say, well, we weren't giving black folks homes. I mean, there are a lot of factors complicating this scenario. When we talk...
The redlining covenants?
The redlining really by law, perfect name for the show, right?
Right.
That's
why I put that name the show Redline.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah. And so The Color of Law,
right.
The book does, and I urge you to read it, Google up and order it on wherever you can, really shows the historical precedents over decades of what occurred here in Detroit. But even now, part of what we're talking about is when we're talking about a mortgage.
Right.
We're talking about not just the credit score of the borrower. We have the home mortgage program, which is a fantastic program right now. That is an incredible program. Someone with a 580 credit score, a reasonable debt-to-income ratio, a job of some reasonable income,
right,
can get assistance to get a home. There's a big commitment. There are $120 million put aside here. The major banks are behind it. Huntington Bank. There's a concerted effort to get people in these homes. Why are they not getting in those homes? You had, I think, 148 people on the list backlog of qualified people for the homes. Where was the housing stock? Why? Now, that had nothing to do with being black. It had to do with a number of other institutional factors that will weigh in on another show.
But I want to explore that there because if somebody's...
It's not just racial.
Yeah, but if somebody's hearing that, they may say maybe there's an attempt to sort of abdicate a major racial factor. So... The explanation you gave, just hold it right here. So the explanation you gave, tying the crash on Wall Street, the role of Chase Bank in the foreclosure crisis, how do you tie all of that in there?
Well, it's complicated because
the common denominator here is home ownership.
Home ownership, but let's talk about the homes you're owning.
Right.
The point is that the typical bank here would not do a mortgage for less than $65,000. Why? Because they really can't make enough money to service the mortgage when the amount that they're loaning is below that amount. So the home mortgage program will give a $70,000 over appraised value to come in and take a home and fix it up, to get it up to an appraised value of that level so they can get a mortgage.
Right.
I mean, they are really doing the right thing. It's not really. They are really doing the right thing, but here's the deal. The problem is that the housing stock we're talking about is on such a large scale, such a vast scale. And this kind of gets over into the demolition program, which we know what happened here on this show and that one. But we don't want to go there. But a lot of the properties, no matter what you do, when the other surrounding properties aren't also brought up to the same standard at the same time, and everybody's brought into the neighborhood at once, you still can't get those appraised values. You still really can't actually get the deals done. So it's not necessarily the borrower, but the housing stock itself.
No.
And a lot of that stock, just getting to your question, a lot of that stock was the way it was because when we had the foreclosure crisis, we had so many homes that were foreclosed on all at once, and so many people left all at once, it became very difficult to right the ship one occupant and one buyer at a time. You had to do it on a very large scale. Well, that hasn't happened yet.
Let me read something for you that really presents it in perspective, Brian, and I think it's a slight departure from your view, from your explanation here. This is an article in the Detroit News, February 15, 2018. Detroit area blacks twice as likely to be denied home loans. 50 years after the Federal Fair Housing Act banned racial discrimination in lending, African Americans and Latinos continue to be routinely denied conventional mortgage loans at rates far higher than their white counterparts, including in Metro Detroit and the Lansing area. This modern-day redlining persisted in 61 metro areas, even when controlling for applicants' income loan amount, and neighborhood, according to millions of Home Mortgage Disclosure Act records analyzed by Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. The analysis found that in the Detroit, Dearborn, Livonia area, black applicants were almost twice as likely to be denied a conventional home purchase loan as white applicants in 2016, not 1967. Detroit ranked 44th out of 48 communities nationally where the analysis found blacks were denied loans at a higher rate. The rate for Lansing, East Lansing was even higher. Black applicants were more than 3 times as likely to be denied a conventional home purchase loan as white applicants. That ranked its 10th out of 48 communities nationwide. What do we blame this on? Racism, period. This is from a report in February. I read it.
Yeah, and actually, I think we discussed that report. Yeah, we've shared that data, and it's clear that that's not even arguable. Those are all matters.
But these are banks. These are banks. These are banks.
They are.
These are what banks are doing. Redlining is still a reality.
No question about it. No question about it. But what I am saying, though, is that the bigger, if we're looking at Detroit overall, Detroit had the largest single incidence of single-family home ownership in America. Right. So we're talking about a sea of homes.
Right.
And that's absolutely true.
Right.
But what I'm saying, the sample size that I'm referring to is on an even bigger scale than that. And the systemic problems that we're dealing with aren't necessarily invidiously discriminating against African Americans. It just accentuates what you said even more.
Yeah, but this is racism here practiced by the banks. That's what this report says.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on that only because it's been confirmed in other cities as well, like Baltimore, like Washington, D.C., like Philadelphia. I mean, it's a nationwide problem, so it's still racism throughout the entire banking industry and system.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually made worse by the things that I was saying. That's what I'm saying. But no way are we essentially abandoning a factual premise. What we're simply saying is that it's made even worse on the scale that we're talking about here. And that's
but one
that's
cannot
question. That's a good question, though, because as you also say, when you had